Hello everyone. We finished talking in the previous lecture about research paradigms. We mentioned the definition of research paradigm, the components of research paradigms, and finally we talked about the types of research paradigms, which are positivism, post-positivism, constructivism or interpretivism, and pragmatism. In this lecture, we will start talking about the different traditions or different approaches to qualitative research. As we mentioned in the first lecture, we said that there are five main types of qualitative research approaches or traditions, which are case study, ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, and narrative research. In this lecture, we will start talking about first two types of qualitative research approaches, which are case study research and ethnographic or ethnography. We know that there are in research there are every term or every concept has several definitions in the literature, so no one agreed upon a definition about particular terms, mostly in research. So simply we can say about case study, before we start talking about it in details, we can say simply that case study is an intensive study about a person or a group of people or a particular unit. Regarding ethnography, we can say that is a qualitative research approach which comes from the discipline of anthropology, but ethnography can be applied to another fields or another disciplines. So it can be understood that as in-depth investigation of culture, in-depth investigation of part of this culture. So in ethnography, the main essence that the researcher observes and or interact with a study participants in their real life environments. So the main essence of ethnographic research, as we will see throughout this lecture, is that the researcher observes and or interacts with the study participants in their real life environments and their culture. And a difference from another type of qualitative research that it requires a longer time period than other qualitative research traditions or approaches. So the learning objectives from this lecture. After this lecture, you should be able to understand the definition of case study, and you will be able to know that there are many definitions for the case study and even for ethnography. You will be able to identify data collection methods in case study research, what are the tools that we can use to collect data in the case of case study research, and describe the steps of performing case study research, and to identify the weaknesses or the limitations of case study research. You will be able to describe the details, definitions of ethnographic research, uses of ethnographic research, and the aim of ethnographic research as well. So before we start talking about case study research and the definition of case study research, what is the meaning of a case? A case is a single instance or a sample of one. Easton 2010 explains the meaning of the case in the case study research as a phenomenon which is spatially delimited and that the unit is studied either at one point or over a bounded period of time. So bounded, as you will see in the next slide, is one of the core aspects in the definition of case study research, that it's found to be common among the majority of definitions in regarding case study research. So the case study need to be bounded or limited by either space or by time to obtain a comprehensive understanding of this particular case or the multiple cases. The case can be ranged from individual to group, project, policy, institution. It could be a city or a country or a particular business or a particular social group. So it can range from an individual to the whole country. Now we will start talking about case study research definition. As we mentioned, there are several definitions and there is no agreed upon definition for case study research in the literature. In this slide you can see one of these definitions. Case study research is a qualitative approach in which the investigator explores a bounded system, a case or multiple bounded systems, cases over time through detailed in-depth data collection involving multiple sources of information such as observation, interviews, audiovisual material and documents and reports a case description and case-based themes. So regarding this definition, as you can see, this case study research is a qualitative approach. In addition to qualitative approach, a case study can also involve quantitative data collection methods. For example, in your case study, you can collect both data from interviews and you can also do surveys for the participants. So in this case, it can be called as a mixed method case study research. One important point regarding case study, as you can see in this slide, which is a bounded system. So your case should be limited or bounded by several determinants. For example, case study could be bounded by time. So you can determine the time limits that you will do your case study research in. So for example, I want to do my case study during 2 weeks period, and I will specify this period in my report or in my research, and it's bounded by, for example, by place. So I want to do my case study in this particular world, for example, this particular city or country, and so on. So and as we mentioned, it could be one case or multiple cases over time. The size of the case, as we said, it's range. It could be one individual, could be family, could be a city, could be country as a whole. So the second important element and the definition of case study research, which can be found also in majority of definitions of case study research, is the in-depth data collection involving multiple sources of information. So in case study research, you need to collect data from multiple sources of information, such as observations, interviews, audiovisual material, and documents and reports. So, for example, if you want to do a case study about a particular patient, you can make interview with that patient, you can make observations, you can also ask for records for that patient from the hospital. So in this way, you're collecting information from many sources, which will allow you to have a comprehensive picture or in-depth investigation of your case or of, in this example, for that particular patients. And you can now analyze this data and produce a case description and case-based themes, which, as we mentioned, will help you an in-depth understanding of your case. So, as we mentioned, there are multiple definitions regarding case study research. So, in this table, you can see examples of these definitions. For example, according to Stake, a case study is both the process of learning about the case and the product of our learning. according to Yen, a case study, the all-encompassing feature of a case study is its intense focus on a single phenomenon within its real-life context. So case studies are research situations where the number of variables of interest far outstrip the number of data points. A case study, also according to Yen, can be an empirical inquiry that investigates a contemporary phenomenon in depth and within its real-life context, especially when the boundaries between phenomenon and context are not clearly evident. According to Miles and Huberman, it's a phenomenon of some sort occurring in a bounded context. Green and Thorogood, it's an in-depth study undertaken by one particular case, which could be a site, individual, or policy. And according to George and Bennett, it's an instance of a class of events, where the term class of events refers to a phenomenon of scientific interest that the investigator chooses to study with the aim of developing theory regarding causes of similarities or differences among instances or cases of that class of events. So, as we mentioned, the main points of mutual, or the main aspects that found mutually between these two definitions is in-depth investigation of a particular phenomenon in its real-life context, and the presence of what we call a bounded context, which means limitation of the cases by time and by place. So, as we mentioned, there are several definitions for case study research. Commenting on the definition of Yen that is provided in the previous slide, which is the research situations where the number of variables of interest outstrips or exceeds the number of data points. So this is an important point that lead us to the conditions that lead to having more variables of interest than data points in case study research. So according to this definition, the number of variables exceed the number of data points in case study research due to several reasons. Firstly, making an in-depth inquiry using case study research, studying conditions over time, as we mentioned, regarding the main characteristics of case study research, which is bounded by time, and studying the processes over time, and covering various contextual conditions. So all these three reasons make the number of variables of interest in case study research exceeding the number of data points. So take it in another way. So assuming that each case is a single data point. So case study research as involving inquiries where the number of variables of interest will far outstrip the number of available data points. These three conditions lead to the large number of variables in any given case study. So the conditions are making an in-depth inquiry, studying conditions over time, and covering contextual conditions in case study research. We continue talking about case study research, and case studies have been long established in healthcare research, in medicine, anthropology, and psychology research. Case study research is effective to investigate and understand complex issues in real-world settings. So, an important point, or a key point in case study research, is that it's used, or it aims to understand complex phenomena or complex problems in real-world settings, which means that in case study where we are studying these issues, or these process, or these phenomena, or these persons. As we mentioned, the case could be a one person in their real life settings, or in their context, which is here we can understand that there is a contrast with the experiment by which we in we do the experiment in the lab, and we bring people to the lab and do some experiment and make some manipulation of particular variables to do this experiment. However, in the case of case study research, we are going to do this case study in its context. So we are going to understand particular contemporary phenomenon in its context, in its place, or in its setting. Usually, a case study is considered equivalent to qualitative research method. A case study can be considered a qualitative in a sense that it studies a smaller sample of something, but in some ways, the case study can be also considered a quantitative or a mixed method case study. So, case study research is not exclusively concerned with the qualitative methods, while it's usually considered as an approach or considered equivalent to qualitative research method. However, we can in case study collect quantitative data, such as collecting data using surveys. We can also use both the quantitative and the qualitative data. In such case, it can be called as a mixed method case study research. So the key point that case study research is not exclusively concerned with the qualitative methods. So the case in case study usually describes a series of events, or as we mentioned, a process or a phenomenon, or could be, for example, a person, that reflect the activity or problem as it happened. Again, we need to stress on the point in its context and real world settings. So we need to investigate the phenomenon in case study research and its context, which is different from experiment study, which we do in the laboratory. So the main source of power in case study research is the ability to use several sources of information to obtain a comprehensive investigation or understanding of the phenomenon under investigation. The case study research can involve several types of data collection tools, such as document analysis, archival records, interviews, surveys, and participant observation. And the researcher can use these research tools and do triangulation to obtain a better picture for the topic under study. And we already mentioned in the previous lectures the type of triangulation, which are investigator triangulation methods, triangulation, data triangulation, and lastly theoretical triangulation. So in this slide we can see the different types of triangulation. Firstly, we have data triangulation, which means data is collected at different times or from different sources in a study of a phenomenon. So it means, for example, collecting maybe quantitative data or qualitative data from different stakeholders, different participants, or at different times. Methodological triangulation, collecting both the quantitative and the qualitative data in the same study to understand or to obtain an in-depth understanding of a particular phenomenon. So the data triangulation could involve only quantitative data or only qualitative data, but you collect them from different participants or at different time lines. We have the researcher or investigator triangulation, whereby several researchers collect data independently on the same phenomenon and compare their findings. And lastly, we have theoretical triangulation, where the research phenomenon is examined from different theories or different theoretical perspectives that are available in the literature regarding the phenomenon under investigation. So regarding case study research, there is an important concept that is used frequently regarding case study research, which is maintaining empirical intimacy, or maintaining the researcher empirical intimacy, which means that the investigator or the researcher preserves an intensive concentration and focus on the case or on the cases selected for his or her study. An important point also regarding case study research is that it cannot be replicated, as a case study is spatially and temporally bounded. As we said, it's spatially, which is bounded by place, and bounded by time, so it cannot be replicated. What we can say that about case study, it could be a single case study or multiple case. So case studies do not necessarily have to include one single case, but also can involve multiple cases. And a single case study can help describing an existing phenomenon. However, multiple case studies can be better ground for building theory from case studies. And the phenomenon becomes more generalizable if it occurs in a number of cases. In the term, we can call it in the case of case study as analytical generalization, which is the theory that has been produced from the several cases, can be generalizable, can be generalized to other cases, and which is different from what we call a statistical generalization, which is used in the case of quantitative research. This figure shows the difference in generalization between quantitative survey and case study research. As you can see, we can see on the x-axis the accuracy, and on the y-axis we have the generalizability of the research. So in this figure you can see that the case study research as one with high accuracy and low generalizability. On the opposite side you can see the survey or the quantitative survey. So the quantitative survey of potential of generating high generalizability and low accuracy results. The case of generalizability in quantitative survey, it can be called as statistical generalization. However, when we mentioned in the previous slide that when we generate a theory from multiple cases and see that this theory can be applied or repeated or applicable in another cases, so we can call it as a theoretical generalization or analytical generalization, as mentioned in the previous slide. Now we will come to the types of case study research. According to Yen, who is one of the leading authors in the field of case study research, Yen identifies the three types of case studies, which are descriptive, exploratory, and explanatory case study research. Descriptive, as the name implies, it aims to describe the phenomenon or the particular phenomenon of interest within its context, within its real life situations. In this case, we can, as we mentioned, collect data from many sources and use these data to describe this phenomenon. Exploratory, it's mainly used in the case that there is not enough known or not enough literature on a particular topic, and for example there's no particular tool or particular survey that you can find in the literature to explore this event or this phenomenon. So we can use in this case exploratory case study research. So exploratory case study research aims to define questions and hypotheses, or as we mentioned, to test out a research procedure for a further piece of research, such as a large-scale survey. So as we mentioned, exploratory case study research is mainly used in the case there is no enough information regarding particular topic or particular phenomenon. Explanatory case study aims to reveal cause-effect associations of the studied phenomenon and or how explaining how events happen. So you can see it's it can be used to explain particular events or particular processes and reveal also cause-effect associations. It will not be as powerful as the experiments regarding this issue, but it can be used in this regard to reveal the cause-effect relationship or cause-effect associations. So, an important distinction between exploratory case studies and explanatory case studies, that exploratory case studies, as we mentioned in the previous slide, allow the investigation of complex, unique phenomena where previous literature to guide the research is lacking. So there is not enough information is known regarding the topic under investigation. However, where background literature is able to provide a clearer direction for research, questions may be posed that indicate a more explanatory approach or more explanatory or directed toward performing an explanatory case study approach. So now regarding the practical steps of conducting a case study or the steps of performing a case study. So how to perform a case study research? There are 6 steps that you can follow to perform your case study. Firstly, determine and define the research questions. Select the cases and determine data gathering and analysis techniques. Prepare to collect data. Collect data in the field. Evaluate and analyze the data and prepare your report. So, similar to any type of research, the first step is to determine and define your research questions. So the focus or intent is established once an intensive review of the relevant literature has been completed and the problem has been well identified. So similar to any type of research, you need to formulate your research questions, which depends on your reviewing of the literature. So literature review is an important step in every type of research, that you start your research by reviewing the literature, identifying the theories that is used in your particular topic, identifying the gaps in the literature, and you are trying to fill this gap by doing your research. Otherwise, you will still reinvent the wheel. The importance of framing your research direction in the form of a question is that you are then driven to consider your method. So, what is the importance of knowing your research questions? Identifying your research questions, you will be able to know what are the best methods that you can use to obtain the information to answer your research questions or to achieve your aim, your research aim or objectives. So, for example, how would I answer those questions? What information do I need? How would I go about getting it? So all of these information, all of these questions give you a hint or an idea about what are the methods that you can use to answer your research questions. So continuing on the first step on conducting case study research, which is determining and defining the research questions. Similar to any type of research, good research questions and case study research are those questions which will enable the researcher to achieve his or her aim and the objectives of his or her research, and which are capable of being answered in the research context. A key point that you need to know regarding case study research, which is similar to any type of qualitative research, as we mentioned in the first lecture, that qualitative research design is different from quantitative research design, as it is an emergent design. So there are particular changes and evolving of the research process. So and there are particular modifications that could be performed to the design of the research while performing the research in the field. So in this regard, what we can understand that the broad aim of your research will remain the same. But what you can change or evolve during the research process regarding this is your set of research questions. So your research questions can be reformulated according to the updates or changes that happen while the researcher performing the research in the field. So regarding the first step in case study research, which is determining and defining the research questions, in some cases or in some textbooks, this step can be referred to as defining the case. Carefully formulated research questions informed by the existing relevant literature on the research topic, and a prior appreciation of the theoretical issues and settings are all important in appropriately and succinctly defining the case, which is an important and key point in the case study research, and it's distinguishing case study research from other types of research, which is defining the case. Crucially, each case should have a predefined boundary. So the boundary, as we mentioned, is an important consideration in case study research. The case should be bounded spatially, which means by place, and temporally, which means by time. So this predefined boundary clarifies the nature and time period covered by the case study, i.e. its scope, beginning and end. So we should define the timeline that this case study will be performed in. For example, I will do my case study during the 2 weeks period, and I will define this 2-week period. The relevant social group, organization, geographical area, particular ward in a hospital, for example. A geographical area of interest to the investigator, the types of evidence to be collected, what are the sources of information that I will collect to answer my research questions, and the priorities for data collection and analysis. So defining the case is a key point in case study research, and defining the case include defining the boundaries that I will perform my case study in, whether spatially, meaning by place, or temporally by time. So in this slide you can see an example of on the first step of conducting case study research, which is formulating research questions. Research questions might be, at the beginning of your research, what proportion of patients do not comply with medical advice on drugs? Are there differences maybe in age or social class between different categories of patients? Is age a factor? Is the medical condition a factor? As you get into the research, as you get to talk to patients, doctors, and practice nurses, other questions might emerge. This is the point that we already mentioned, that the broad aim of your case study research will remain the same throughout your research process. However, what may change or modified during the research in the field is your set of research questions. So other questions might emerge during performing the research. For example, how clearly are patients told about drug use and the need for compliance? Would follow-up improve compliance? Are patients taking the drugs but not complying with other aspects of medical advice? So here is an example of how to formulate a research question, and the fact that a new research question can emerge during your research. So the second step in conducting case study research is selecting the cases and determining data gathering and analysis techniques. So the case and the case study research can be called as a unit of analysis. So unit of analysis is an important and key concept in case study research, and it can ranged from maybe an individual to a group in a particular organization or organization as a whole. So unit of analysis is an important and key concept in case study research. And as we already mentioned, in case study we can use a single case, be single case or could be multiple cases that reflect the research questions in step one. And in the case of multiple case studies, the number of cases are carefully selected, and the advantage of careful selection of these case studies is to allow for comparisons to be made between these cases or across several cases and or replication. So choosing a typical case may enable the findings to be generalized to theory, which is called analytical generalization, which can be called also as the theoretical generalization, as we mentioned, where the theory that has been generated in one case can be generalized to other cases, which is this concept of analytic generalization is different from statistical generalization that's used in the case of quantitative research. This step also involves selecting the tools and other data collection strategies that will be utilized in the case study research. So also relevant to step two in conducting case study research is selecting that the selected case study site or sites should permit the research team access to the group of individuals, the organization, the processes, or whatever else constitutes the chosen unit of analysis for the study. So access is a central consideration in case study research. The researcher needs to know the case study site well and to work cooperatively with stakeholders in this study site. It is also important to consider in advance the likely burden and risks. So now we are talking about the ethical implications of your case study research. So as we mentioned, it's important to consider in advance the likely burden and risks associated with participation for those who or the sites which comprise your case study. So of particular importance, the obligation for the researcher to think through the ethical implications of the study. For example, the risk of violating anonymity and confidentiality of the participants, and to confirm that the potential participants or participating sites are provided with sufficient information to make an informed choice about joining in this case study. So the ethical implications, similar to any type of research, is important. Also, the access to the research site is important, and cooperation with the stakeholders and the research site, or what we can call as the gatekeeper in the research site, is a central consideration in case study research. So the third step in conducting case study research is to start preparing to collect your data. So this preparation step is an important and can save the researcher much time and frustration later during the research process. So preparation for the vast amounts of data prior to collection will save the researcher much time and frustration later. And this is important in the case of case study research because, as I mentioned, one of the main features of case study research is to collect data from multiple sources of information. So due to the nature of case study research, the researcher will generate large amounts of data from multiple sources. Time taken to plan prior to the research will allow one to organize multiple databases and set categories for sorting and managing the data. And in this regard, or in this step, we can do what we call piloting. And what is the significance of piloting? In the piloting, we can test the research tools or the instrument that we will use in our research For example, if we have a survey, we can do a pilot test for this survey. We can make a small scale study with a number of participants and check the time that's needed to complete the survey by the participants, to check the terms and languages that's used in the survey, and to see if it can be comprehended by those participants, and to make modification for the design of the survey, for example. So this will increase the quality of your work if you do piloting at this step. So in preparing to collecting the data, it's important to consider the large amounts of data that we need to collect in case study research, and in this step also we can do piloting of our research tools, such as a survey, or even for interview and qualitative research. We can do piloting by also doing a small scale study with a number of participants to check the language, the questions, the order of questions, for example, the times needed to complete the interviews, and make the needed amendments to the interview schedule, increasing the quality of your research. So now we come to step 4 in conducting case study research, which collecting data in the field. So as we mentioned that the design and qualitative research is emergent. So in this regard, regarding this step, we can say that data collection and is emergent means that the procedures of data collection can evolve over the course of a research project in response to what is learned in the earlier part of the study. We are talking about the importance of field notes in this regard, or what we call as scratch notes, that help the researcher to provide a thick, rich description of the context and document the needed description or contextual information regarding the study. And it's an important to have a statement in your manuscript or qualitative manuscript that you did a field notes that increase the quality of your research. And there are also a particular criteria that we can depend on to stop the data collection. So there are limitations and features that we can rely on to stop data collection. We will talk about them in the next slides. So as we mentioned, what are the criteria that we can depend on to stop data collection? Firstly, we have exhaustion of sources. Secondly, saturation of categories and overextension. So, exhaustion of sources. Data sources such as key informants or document analysis can be recycled and tapped many times, but at some point it should become clear that little more information or relevance will be gained from further engagement with them. Secondly, saturation of categories. Eventually, the categories used to code data appear to be definitively established. When continuing data collection procedures, only tiny increments of new information about categories in comparison to the effort expended to get them. The researcher can feel confident about ending data collection in this case. And lastly, we have overextension. Even if new information is still coming in, the researcher might develop a sense that the new information is far removed from the central core of viable categories that have emerged and does not contribute usefully to the emergence of additional viable categories regarding the topic of your research. So these are the cases that we can be confident to stop data collection, which are exhaustion of sources, saturation of categories, and overextension. Now we finished collecting our data, so we start evaluating and analyzing the data, and we stress on the importance of or the significance of triangulation. And we already mentioned the definition of triangulation and the types of triangulation that we can use, such as data triangulation, methods triangulation, investigator or researcher triangulation, and finally theoretical triangulation. And we mentioned also as the triangulation is a must in case study research. So we finished data collection. So now we finished data collection and we analyze and evaluate the data. So now we can prepare the report for the case study. There are several considerations regarding reporting of findings. So when reporting findings, it is essential to give the reader with sufficient contextual information to understand the processes that were followed during research and how the conclusions were reached. Also, care must be taken to ensure the anonymity of case sites and individual participants. Of course, we are talking here also about the ethical implications, and if there was agreement in advance to keep the case sites and individual participants as anonymous, we can use in this case or allocate to those sites or participants like what we call particular codes. So similar to any type of research, there are several limitations for case study that need to be taken into consideration. Firstly, the large quantity of data combined with the limited time frame available for some researchers may impact on the depth of analysis of the data within the available time and resources. As we know that one of the key points in case study research is to collecting data from multiple sources of information. This may lead to collecting of large quantity of data, which in light of some time restrictions and resources restrictions and some researchers may impact on the in-depth analysis of this type of data and may impact on the in-depth investigation of the studied phenomena or process. Secondly, deciding the boundaries of case, how it might be constrained in terms of time, events, and processes may be challenging. So sometimes it's challenging for the researcher to define the cases, to make boundary for cases. As we mentioned, one of the key points of case study research is to be bounded by time, which means temporally or spatially by place. So this process may be challenging. Thirdly, large quantity of data may veer away from the research focus. While it's important to collect a large amount of data while it may appear that collecting large quantity of data in case study research may be a strength point, as we mentioned for case study research, however, this should be to a limit where this large quantity of data make a focusing for your research. However, this large quantity of data may sometimes veer away or distract from your research focus. Lastly, providing little basis for generalization unless you do a large number of cases, as we mentioned regarding analytical or theoretical generalization. So, in this slide, this is a case study example, a paper which used case study methodology. The paper title is Nurses Pediatric Pain Management Practices. We can see if you refer to this paper, we can apply what we already learned about case study research to what they use in this paper. So we can see the multiple sources of information that have been used in this study. For example, in this paper, which is Nurses Pediatric Pain Management Practices, one of the authors of this paper has used a case study approach to explore nurses' pediatric pain management practices. This involved collecting several datasets, so multiple sources of information. Firstly, observational data to gain a picture about actual pain management practices. So they use observation as the first source of data in this case study. Secondly, they use the questionnaire data about nurses' knowledge about pediatric pain management practices and how well they felt they managed pain in children. The third source of information or knowledge in this case study example is questionnaire data about how critical nurses perceived pain management tasks to be. So, as you can see, in this case study, they use three sources of information: observational data, questionnaire data about nurses' knowledge about pediatric pain management practices, and the questionnaire data about how critical nurses perceived management tasks to be. So these data sets that have been used in this study were analyzed separately and then compared to each other. And here you can find the main findings of this case study. So this example was placed to show you that in the case study research there is an important point, which is collecting data from several sources of information and analyzing of these individually and then comparing them to each other. For example, as you can see, there was a difference in self-reported and observed practices. Actual or observed practices did not conform to best practice guidelines, whereas self-reported practices tended to conform to best practice guidelines. So, recommended reading for case study research is, as we mentioned, Yen is one of the leading authors in the field of case study research. Case study research and applications design and methods by Robert Yen is an important source to be referred to should you need more information regarding case study research. Now we will start talking about the second type or second approach in qualitative research, which is ethnography. Ethnography has its origin from Greek, ancient Greek, and it means writing of the culture. So it's associated with cultural beliefs, cultural practices. So ethnography can be defined as the study of social interactions, behaviors, and perceptions that occur within groups, teams, organizations, and communities. The main objective for doing ethnographic research is to provide rich, holistic insights into people's views and actions, as well as the nature of the location they inhabit. As we said, it's study or writing of particular culture through the collection of detailed observations and interviews. So one of the key points in ethnographic research is observations. So we are trying to overcome or to mitigate the limitations of doing interviews by also complementing it with observations of this particular culture. So one of the key points in ethnographic research is the data collection methods that is mainly used in ethnographic research is the observation of the participants in their particular culture. So all in all, ethnography can be defined as a qualitative research method in which the researcher observes a social setting to provide descriptions of a group, society, or an organization. So, similar to case study research, there are several definitions for ethnography. So Hamsley in 2006 states that ethnography is a study at first hand about what people do and say in a particular context Most researchers collect data through participant observation and/or open-ended interviews, also from various documents to understand and explain the participants' perspectives. Another definition for ethnography by Fleck in 2002 as a method to explore the nature of a certain social phenomenon, and it tends to use unstructured data. The third definition is by Owner in 1993, as cited in Fleck et al. 2004, stated that ethnographies usually focus on a specific culture, characteristics, and all information embedded in this culture. So there are several similarities among these definitions, which is mainly, as we mentioned, is the study of a particular culture using several methods, mainly observation and or open-ended interviews. So another definition for ethnography by Webster in 2019. Ethnography is a qualitative methodology, so it's a methodological approach that involves using different types of qualitative methods or tools, principally observation, whether participant and non-participant observation, and we will talk about the types of observation which are participant and non-participant in the lecture of data collection methods in qualitative research. So principally, or the main type of data collection methods in ethnography is observation alongside interviews and textual analysis. So it's the emphasis on observation alongside other qualitative methods, as well as the analytic focus on culture. These are the cornerstones of ethnography or ethnographic research. So the term of ethnography or ethnography term was initially introduced by anthropologists. So ethnography is a well-established anthropological method of writing a holistic description and analysis of a culture. So a culture is a key point in ethnographic research. Usually ethnographies are created through participant observation and are a key part of anthropological research. One of the main advantages of ethnographic research is in that it helps to mitigate or overcome the weaknesses of relying only on interview data. So, through the collection of observations, interviews, and documentary data, which are triangulated, compared and contrasted with one another, so this will give some strong point or strength points to ethnographic research, which is in triangulating of all of these sources of data in one study, particularly as we mentioned, the observation or participant observation. So through its use of in situ observations, observations in the same place or observation in the same culture, direct observation of participants, ethnographers can immerse themselves in a social setting, thereby generating a rich understanding of a social action in this particular culture. So participant observation also provides ethnographers an opportunity to gather empirical insights into social practices which are normally hidden from the public gaze. So, ethnographer not only observes a social group, setting, or subject matter, but engaged in the participation actively with general commitment to observing everyday social life. So they engage with the participants or the people in this cultural group in their activities to be able to obtain further details regarding the phenomenon under investigation. The ethnographic researchers obtain information about certain socio-cultural phenomena through the members of the society or documents about those phenomena. So now we are talking about the data collection methods and ethnographic research, which are mainly observation and interviews, which can be called as ethnographic fieldwork. And another important data collection tool or technique that it's used in the ethnographic research is using earlier written records, which is known as ethnohistoric research. So we will start talking about data collection and ethnographic work or ethnographic research. We are talking about long-term involvement and observation are considered essential to understand the complexity of people's belief, attitudes, and behaviors in a real life context. So it's important, an important concept in the ethnographic research to be familiar with is the immersion and the particular culture. So the ethnographer needs to immerse him or herself in this particular culture in the real world context, and which allows the researcher to discover and describe the complexities of the social world in this culture. And the time that's required for immersion of the ethnographic researcher in a particular culture depends on several factors. For example, the familiarity of the ethnographer with this particular culture, and it could be also the experience and skills of the ethnographer, by which those who are more experienced in ethnographic research will have will need less time to achieve the objectives of their research. Currently, there are some use of portable audio and video recording devices that may rapidly provide large amounts of data and support researchers in understanding the phenomena of study in ethnographic research, so that reduce the time that's required for the researcher to be immersed or to be involved in the particular culture. So now we will stress on the concept of immersion ethnographic research. What is the meaning of immersion? Immersion means that the researchers are making observations over time. So the key point that the researchers are not only making one observation, but making observations over time, which allows the researcher to have an in-depth understanding also of the social interactions between the individuals in this particular culture or in this particular research setting. Therefore, there is not just only one observation that will conclusively define the evolving understanding of the phenomena the researcher is studying. For example, if the ethnographer or ethnographic researcher was observing a clinic, for example, he or she may want to focus on patients and at one time maybe look at the physicians at another time and then at the nurses, and he also or she may want also to focus or to concentrate on the interactions between individuals in these particular settings. So over time of observation, the ethnographic researcher or ethnographer may start or begin to understand what he or she is seeing from the perspective of insiders to this research setting or to this particular situation. So also we will talk about an important concept in ethnographic research, which is the concept of reflexivity. Reflexivity refers to the ways in which the products of research are affected by the personnel and process of doing research, which means the product of research are influenced by the researcher thoughts, beliefs, and assumptions. So in order to make the data collection and interpretation transparent, researchers creating ethnographies frequently attempt to be reflexive. So the aim of this reflexivity is to explore the ways in which the researcher's involvement with a particular study influences, acts upon, and informs such type of research. So Simply, reflexivity in ethnography means thinking carefully about who has done the research and how, under what condition, how the research was written, by whom, and what impact these might have on the value of the ethnography that's generated in the end. So, reflexivity is generally understood as awareness of the influence the researcher has on the people or topic being studied, while simultaneously recognizing how the research experience is affecting the researcher. Another definition also for reflexivity, it can be understood as a process of self-examination, exploring one's assumption, emotional reactions, cultural positioning of the researcher. So it means that putting the or examination, or sometimes it's called self-reflexivity, which means that putting the researcher's own assumptions, beliefs, attitudes, values within the research process in ethnography, whether in the data collection or data analysis, interpretation of the results, and writing the final report. So, reflexive researchers are, in essence, gazing in two directions at the same time. So, this called sometimes as double perspectives. So, again, reflexivity means that recording how the beliefs and assumptions of the ethnographer plays part in his or her research. For example, as an example for reflexivity in ethnographic research, suppose the researcher did observation for a particular group. Reflexivity in when this researcher contemplates how his or her background, values, as we mentioned, beliefs and attitudes may have played part in his or her research. So the researcher will write his or her own thoughts in the final report of ethnographic work. And in turn, this will help the reader to have more knowledge about the background, values, and beliefs of the researcher, or thus the individual who wrote this research. So the importance of this lies in limiting or reducing subjectivity. In qualitative research. So, as we mentioned, all in all, the key to reflexivity is to make the relationship between the influence of the researcher and the participants explicit. So, as we mentioned, reflexivity in qualitative research, and in particular in ethnographic research, improves the quality of research through its ability to extend the understanding of how researchers' positions, beliefs, interests, values, and assumptions affect research process, and reflexivity in the form of an account of researcher continuous self-critique and self-appraisal reveals signposts for readers that tell them what is going on. So it gives signposts for the readers of your research about what is happening throughout the research process, which helps, as we mentioned, to limit or reduce subjectivity of the research. So the paper that you can see its title in this slide, which is Reflections on Self in Qualitative Research, Stories of Family. This paper shows the use of reflexivity in qualitative research, and it emphasizes the importance of reflexivity and enhancing the quality of qualitative research. So you can refer for this paper for the purpose of further comprehension regarding the concept of reflexivity in ethnographic research. We will continue talking about particular features of ethnographic research. Ethnographic research is exploratory research in nature, which means that the ethnographer or ethnographic researcher needs to go into the field, and field work is an important consideration in the ethnographic research, and he or she will go to field to explore a cultural or socio-cultural group, and also to explore certain social interactions. So it's not only observations of particular individuals in this group, but also we need in ethnographic, one of the cornerstone of ethnographic research is to explore social interactions among individuals in this particular culture or in this particular group. As we mentioned, regarding any type of qualitative research, we can make modification to the research questions, design, and technique from the beginning until the completion of a study. And this process or this feature of ethnographic research has been described as an interactive reactive approach. As any type of research, there are some limitations regarding ethnography. Due to complexity of ethnography, unlike many other forms of qualitative research, ethnographic research is more difficult to undertake. Also, the unpredictability of everyday life in a particular culture that the researcher observes, it indicates that data collection processes or activities can be disrupted or access withdrawn from the research setting, depending on ever-changing local circumstances and politics in this particular culture. So all of these can be considered as limitations to ethnographic research. There are particular and important implications for the use of ethnography in healthcare. Why it's important, and what is the significance of using ethnographic methodology or ethnography methodology of qualitative research and healthcare research. So the research method of ethnography is becoming increasingly popular in the field of healthcare research to study behavior and social interactions, and we will take throughout this lecture an example on ethnographic study that has been conducted in the healthcare to see the applications of this particular methodology in practice or in research. Why it's important, or what is the significance of using ethnography in healthcare? Because hospitals in nature are often cultures within themselves, and while some can be very similar, the community of the hospital is often unique. Because hospitals reflect dominant culture and belief systems, the care in each hospital can be different based on the cultural influences. So you need to know that every hospital or every healthcare setting has a particular type of culture which is different from another healthcare setting, and this is due to this point, the ethnographic research may play an important role in studying the culture of different healthcare settings. So, as we mentioned, from the outside, hospitals look and operate similarly. The patient care and decision-making processes can vary widely among different healthcare settings. So, through ethnography, behaviors are understood and used to treat the patient through means that fit the needs of the patient. The benefits brought by the ethnography are understanding of the social and cultural backgrounds of the patients and how health behaviors differ across groups. So ethnography has an important application in healthcare research due to various cultures among different types of healthcare settings that needs to be investigated using ethnographic research. So, similar to any type of research, there are several steps for ethnographic research. Firstly, we will start with the planning. Similar to any type of research, you need to plan your research. You need to take access to the setting that you want to perform your research, and you want to take the ethical approval to be able to commence your data collection in this particular culture or in this particular setting. Then you need to do sampling. Sampling mainly, as we mentioned in qualitative research, it's purposive sampling. Then we will start data collection in this particular research setting. Then these data are going to be analyzed and finally write up of your report. So we will start with the first step of ethnographic research, which is, as we mentioned, is planning, where you need to have access and to gain the ethic approval for performing your research in a particular research setting or research culture. So attaining approval from the appropriate decision makers for access to a research setting is an essential first step in planning and ethnography. And in this stage, we are talking about what we call developing key informants. Developing key informants at this stage, or the people who are let you in or let you give you the permission to get into this particular research setting or to get into this particular culture to collect your information is a very important step and key concept in ethnographic research, which may help also the researcher to be accepted by this particular culture. Attaining access may be challenging. So one of the limitations or hurdles that you may face or may encounter the ethnographer is attaining access, especially because the main data collection method in ethnographic research is to do participant observation. So while you are doing observation, some people are maybe or frequently reluctant at the thought of being scrutinized by researchers. And this is one of the difficulties or hurdles that may encounter the ethnographic researcher. And this also may, as we mentioned, or as we will talk about it, and the limitations of ethnographic research can lead to emergence of what we call Hawthorne effect, where the participants may change their behavior in the thought that they are observed by people from outside their culture or from outside their setting. So this could be also a limitation for ethnographic research, which is Hawthorne effect. So we continue talking about the first step, which is planning for ethnographic research. One of the main issues or one of the key concepts in ethnographic research is establishing rapport. So as ethnographic research entails a long-term commitment on the part of both the researcher and also the participants. This should involve the researcher, in this case, should establish a reciprocal relationships based on a mutual trust and understanding of these participants in this particular culture, or what we call a rapport. And this rapport is very important to help the researcher gain access to a particular culture or to a particular research setting, and it's important for ethical issues also. So it's crucial that ethnographers build mutually trusting relationships for ethical issues and to ensure also the quality of ethnographic research and collecting of accurate information from the participants. We are talking about the concept also of gatekeepers. Gatekeepers, as we mentioned, those are the people that will let you in, will let the researcher in this particular culture to collect the data, and sometimes we call them as a key informants. we need at this step also to obtain ethical approvals for the research, and by also addressing ethical issues such as avoidance of harm to participants, giving the informed consent to the participants as well, and to maintain their privacy and confidentiality. Establishing rapport in ethnographic research can be achieved maybe by, as we mentioned, building a mutually trust relationship with the participants. For example, there are several methods that rapport can be established in ethnographic research. For example, making eye contact with the participants, for example, shaking hands with the participants, paying attention to others in this particular culture. And you need to know that this rapport or this mutually trust relationship can be built in this particular culture over time. That means it will be built gradually while the researcher is actively observing the participants in their culture. So the trust can be earned over time. Especially the researcher will be being involved in a particular culture for a long time, maybe sometimes sharing food with them, maybe also some researchers learn their language, adopting also their cultural habits and beliefs, so and show that the researcher have an interest in them. All of these techniques or methods can help the researcher in establishing rapport in ethnographic research, which is also, as we mentioned, very important for enhancing the quality of ethnographic research as well. Step 2 of ethnographic research is sampling. So sampling of the research setting is an important component of ethnography. The type of sampling associated with ethnography is purposive sampling, whereby the researcher chooses a specific group and setting to be studied. Often, a single study site is selected, but multiple individuals, actions, and activities embedded within this setting are selected to develop an insightful account of daily life. For example, we may choose this particular hospital, we may choose this particular ward, we may perform our ethnographic research, and for example, in emergency ward, in the hospital or in the ICU. So we choose this particular setting, and we explore the activities, actions, and multiple individuals within this particular setting that we selected. So regarding data collection and ethnographic research, the key concept in ethnographic research in data collection is the participant observation. So as we already mentioned about qualitative research, or one of the main features of qualitative research is that the researcher is the tool for data collection in this particular type of research. And since ethnography is one type of qualitative research approach, so we can say that the researcher is the major research tool for data collection in ethnographic research. So as we mentioned, we are talking about participant observation, which is a field strategy that simultaneously combines document analysis, interviewing of respondents and informants, direct participation, and observation. So several methods are commonly used as a component of participant observation in ethnographic research, which include in-depth interviews and document analysis. Ethnographic fieldwork typically involves the development of close connections, as we mentioned, about establishing rapport with the participants, building a mutual trust relationship with them, which helps in gaining the ethical approvals and enhancing the quality of ethnographic research and collecting of accurate information. So ethnographic fieldwork typically involves the development of close connections between the fieldworker or the researcher and subjects or participants and situations being studied. So we can say that the signature of ethnography is the use of participant observation, which is characterized by the researcher becoming submerged within a particular culture, and subsequently day-to-day lives of those who are being studied in this particular culture. So, continuing talking about data collection and ethnographic research and regarding in-depth interviews, which is importantly to know that it's complementary data collection methods to participant observation and ethnographic research. So in-depth interviews are also referred to as focused or unstructured or ethnographic interviews, which does not involve using a fixed questions, but aims to engage the interviewee in conversation to elicit their understandings and interpretations. These interviews are characterized by active involvement in engaging the participant to converse about particular topic or discussion relevant to the research questions or topic being explored. And as we mentioned, interviews are complementary to participant observation ethnographic research. And we need to stress here on the concept of triangulation, which is an important component in qualitative research, which is analytic technique or analytical technique that incorporates and compares multiple methods with the intent of providing a more in-depth and holistic understanding of a phenomenon. And we already talked about the types of triangulation, which are data triangulation, methods triangulation, investigator triangulation, and theory triangulation. So regarding data analysis and ethnographic research, there are different approaches that can be used to analyze data collected during an ethnographic study. And this analysis and interpretation of the data can proceed in parallel. For example, some scholars suggest doing what we call thematic analysis, and we will talk about thematic analysis of qualitative interviews in a separate lecture. In this process, field notes and interviews should be transcribed and together analyzed for themes and meanings, allowing the observation to be understood, which is the process of thematic analysis. Other scholars believes that descriptive analysis is the more traditional approach to use to analyze ethnographic studies. So as we mentioned, there are different approaches that can be used to analyze data in ethnographic work or ethnographic research. The final step in ethnographic work or ethnographic research is write-up. So to help ensure the trustworthiness of the research findings in ethnographic research, the researchers must be able to illustrate their steps in data collection and in the data analysis process. So all of these details should be provided in the final report in ethnographic research. As we already mentioned in previous lectures, that qualitative research is associated with the emic perspective, which is the insider's perceptions. So here in ethnography, basically we use both emic and etic. So using the interviews and ethnographic research by using in-depth interviews, which can give the emic, which is the insider's perception. So these interviews, or which gives the emic approach or emic perspective to the researcher, help the researcher uncover the information of why people behave in the way they do. So doing an interviews and ethnographic research helps the researcher to gain the emic perspective or the insider perspective of the particular phenomenon under investigation. On the other hand, the etic, which is the alternative perspective, which happens when the researcher attempts to make sense of what has been observed without the explanations from the participants or from the individuals in the investigated culture. So in ethnographic research, we try to use both terms, which are emic, which can be obtained by performing an in-depth interviews with the participant to obtain their insider perspectives regarding the phenomenon under investigation, and the ethic approach, which is the attempt of the researcher to make sense of what he or she has observed without the explanation from the participants. So similar to any type of research, ethnographic research has several limitations that need to be taken into consideration while interpreting the results of ethnographic research. Firstly, regarding sample size, as the ethnographic research needs a detailed data collection process that may impact on the number of participants that may be involved in this work, and it can be considered as a limitation or a weakness for ethnographic research. So the time required being involved in participant observation and conducting long interviews in ethnographic research greatly maybe limits or reduces the sample size. Secondly, we are talking about what we call Hawthorne effect. Hawthorne effect, it means that the people who are being observed may change their behavior when they are aware that they are being observed by an outsider to their culture. So this may impact on the quality of research and accuracy of the information and or the data collected. Thirdly, it is difficult to generalize with the ethnography method. This is the main issue in qualitative research in general, which is lack of generalization. So when researching a certain culture in ethnographic research, the results cannot necessarily be generalized to other populations. So because the results in particular ethnographic research are based on particular cultural responses, so the outcome of the study cannot be applied beyond where the study was conducted. So if you did an ethnographic research to explore best practices in an emergency room in particular part of the country, for example, these or the same best practices for this particular emergency room may not be applied to the hospital or to an emergency room in another hospital in other part of the country. Lastly, the acceptance of the culture, which is an important issue in the case of ethnographic research. So should the researcher choose ethnography to do his or her research, the researcher must be accepted at least temporarily within this particular culture, which allows him or her to gather or collect accurate information for the purpose of his or her research. So for this issue, we need, for example, the researcher what he or she can do to increase the acceptance of the culture toward him or her. They can develop, the researchers, they can develop key informants, for example, or what we call expert witnesses. Those are key people within this particular culture who can give the permission, who can collaborate with the researcher from this particular culture, give the researchers the permission to get into this culture and collect and information and perform their research. Or those people, or what we call key informants, are those people who can grant access to the researcher to perform his or her research in this particular culture. So to increase the acceptance of the culture to the researchers, so as to be able to collect accurate information, developing of key informants is an important and key concept in ethnographic research. So in this slide, we will talk about the differences, the main differences between case study and ethnographic research. As we mentioned, regarding case study does not only depend on participant, observer, data, but mainly uses interviews. And case study also does not have to present direct and detailed observations, but it can be based on any quantitative or qualitative data. On the other hand, ethnography may require certain periods of time in the field and emphasize details of observational evidence. And as we mentioned, the signature of ethnography is the participant observation to obtain detailed information regarding a particular culture or regarding the situations under investigation. And the ethnographer may use an interview as an additional technique. As we mentioned, the in-depth interviews and the ethnographic research is a complementary to participant observation. So the importance of the in-depth interviews to capture whole participants' perspective. In this slide, you can see an example of ethnographic study the paper entitled Challenges in Delivering Bad News in a Multi-Ethnic Intensive Care Unit, an Ethnographic Study. You can, in this case, you need to refer to this paper, which I will upload on the e-learning portal, and you can use the theoretical concepts that we have covered in this lecture and to see how these concepts can be applied in practice or in research. So reading such papers is important, as I mentioned, to apply the theory with the application of this qualitative research approach and practice. Finally, hope you found this lecture interesting. Thank you very much. And if you have any question regarding the material of this lecture, you can email me at the email address provided at the beginning of this course. Thank you very much.